Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is an Irish case actually. It's the disappearance of a little girl called Mary Boyle. Now, Mary disappeared on the 18th of March in 1977 and she was just 6 years old at the time. This case has been described as Ireland's longest missing child case, since she has now been missing for 44 years and to this day nobody knows what happened to her. Also, the authorities are no closer today than they were all those years ago to solving this one. If you guys have any suggested cases, please let me know. I will look into them for you. Mary was born on the 17th of June in 1970 to her parents Anne and Charlie Boyle. She was actually born in Sparkhill in Birmingham in England, and Mary was an identical twin. Her sister was named after her mother, so also shared the name Anne, and she also had an older brother called Paddy. Now, after being born in England, the family did decide to move back to Ireland, so at the time of this case happening, she lived in Kinclasslag, which is a seaside village in Rosses, around 2 hours away from Mary's grandparents' home. Again, they decided that they no longer wanted to live in England. Charlie really missed Ireland, and Anne actually wanted to move to America by all accounts, but he did not want to be that far away from his native Ireland, and so that is where they ended up moving back to raise their children. I believe Mary was only 2 years old when they moved back. Her grandparents from Anne's side of the family, so Anne's parents, lived on this farm in Cashellad near Ballyshannon. And the area was huge. There was lots of woodland, there was a lake, it was just enormous, and there was just so much room for the kids to play about and things like that. Now, I just want to say here actually, before I carry on, if I butcher any of these names, please forgive me. I am terrible with them. I don't mean any offense by it. Even though I've searched them up, I still will get them wrong, most likely. So I just wanted to throw that out there and apologise profusely. On the 18th of March in 1977, Mary was at her grandparents' home. They had gone down the day before because they were going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day there. It was something they often did. They often went down to the grandparents' house and spent time there. They had a massive farm and, you know, they would love to play out there with their cousins and things like that. They lived in a remote area that not very many people lived in, and on the 18th, the children were doing exactly that. They were outside, they were having fun and just playing like kids do. Other family members were there as well, including Mary's uncle, Jeremy Gallagher, who was known as Jerry, and that's how I'm going to refer to him. And her cousins were there and they were just all playing outside. So Jerry had borrowed this ladder from his neighbour. Well, not his neighbour, the grandparents' neighbour. And he was working on the roof that day. At around 3 p.m, he decides that he is finished with the ladder and so he's going to return it. So he picks up the ladder, takes it, starts making his journey back to the neighbour's house, which I believe was a maximum, there's different sources, but a maximum of 10 minutes away. Probably less. Like, you know, it wasn't very far at all. So he begins his journey and Mary decides that she is going to follow. That was around 3:45 p.m. So Jerry and Mary are walking across the fields and then they get to this area that's quite boggy and there's this really big puddle. And Mary decides that she doesn't want to get soaking wet. She's literally tiny. She's 6 years old. She makes the decision that she's going to turn back. Jerry, knowing that Mary knows the way back, very confident that she will be fine, carries on to the neighbour's house. And the walk back would have been about 5 minutes, so it wouldn't have taken Mary long to get back, and he believed she knew the way, and so he didn't see an issue in leaving her to walk back on her own whilst he carried on the journey. Obviously, this was the 70s. Times have changed. You would never ever leave your 6-year-old child to walk back alone. You would have made sure she came with you, kind of thing now. But in them days, children were a lot more free. Children roamed around, and abduction of a child or something like that was never thought of, like ever. And so it was the normal to let your children just walk around, especially if they knew the route. That was just how they did it, and nobody saw any issues with that at the time. Obviously now that's not how it's done. We know of all the dangers and things like that, but at the time it was just not thought about. So Jerry makes it to the neighbour's house. He chats to them for around half an hour and then he begins to head back. He gets back at about 4:40 p.m. and then he carries on working outside on this stone wall that he's repairing. He doesn't really think much of anything and just carries on. He didn't go and check whether Mary had made it home because he assumed that she did. He didn't think nothing about anything. And you've got to remember, in these cases, again, this was the 70s. So, you know, they don't deserve abuse for letting their kid walk alone because it was just the norm then. Eventually, Anne goes out to check on the children who are all playing outside and she cannot see Mary in the group. She shouts over to the kids and asks if anyone has seen Mary and they reply that they haven't seen her in a while. They realise that she is missing and Anne panics. Some areas of the land were boggy, as I've already mentioned. There was a lake nearby and, you know, there was the woods and things, and she could have easily gotten lost. Like, if she'd have wandered off, ended up somewhere that she didn't know her way back, she could have easily gotten lost very quickly. She was only 6 and they did visit a lot, but she didn't live there. She didn't know this area as well as she knew her own home. And so it was very possible that she had just gone lost. So everyone's out looking for Mary. They're all really concerned. They literally do believe that she has gotten lost somewhere. She's missing. And they're out there shouting her name. They come across 2 men on the nearby lake fishing on this boat. And it's very close to the cottage. And they ask, these 2 men hear everyone out shouting Mary, and they ask them, you know, have you seen a little girl? To which they respond that they hadn't. One of these men was called PJ Coughlin, and eventually he did actually offer to drive back to town to go and contact the police. So you've got to think, at this point, the first instinct of the parents is to look for their child. So that's what they did. They're out looking, and all of this is just delaying everything before they contact the police, because not only are they searching for herself, which is what you'd do, you know, I'm not saying that nobody would do that, because they would, but then their way of contacting the police was to drive into town to then let the police know, and then you have to wait for the police to then drive to them before an investigation could get underway. So PJ offers to drive into town for them while they continue their search, and obviously they agree, which he does. He goes in and he reports Mary as a missing child. Not only that, at this point it was getting dark, and so, you know, they needed to have all hands on deck and have the police involved as soon as they could at this point. And police were extremely worried because it was getting dark, they were losing daylight, and as a lot of people know, you know, these cases are very important within the first hour of finding this child, and they didn't actually get there until after 6 p.m, by which point there was very little daylight left and the sun was already setting. The army was actually called in to help with the search. Neighbours were out helping. Obviously, the police were all out there. Family and, you know, acquaintances were all out there looking for Mary. Now, at this point, it's dark and they do have flashlights. But as you know, with flashlights, like, they only have a certain range. It's really difficult to search for somebody using only flashlights. And so the army were doing things like letting off flares to light up the sky so that it would make it easier for them to look for her. It was a very difficult search, especially for a little girl. So if you think she has gotten lost, maybe she's hiding like somewhere because she's frightened to death of being alone in the woods. And trying to then find her with a flashlight would be so difficult. Now, back in the town, there was this festival going on, and it was actually announced over the stage that Mary was missing. And so some people from that festival went out to also help look for her. It was never really thought of Mary going missing as being abducted. Again, they never ever, that was never an assumption in them days. They just figured that she had literally wandered off and gotten lost. But abduction is a highly possible in this case, definitely. They couldn't find a sign of Mary anywhere. Helicopters were out looking, they were scouring the lake, the water, the woods, but they just found nothing. They brought in everything they could, and Mary's case would be all over the news as well, try and help with the notoriety of it. But just a week after Mary had gone missing, nobody had found anything. Divers were sent in to search the lake. They scoured it, and it wasn't super huge or super deep, and so it would be assumed that you would find her body if she had fallen in accidentally and drowned. But they just didn't find anything. Eventually they did drain the lake, and they scraped the bottom, thinking that maybe her body had gotten sucked into like the soft mud or whatever down there. They just found nothing still. There was literally no sign of her. A reconstruction was done using Anne, which was obviously her twin sister. So they put that all over the news and things, just to try and get everything that they could out there, and hopefully the public knew something or had heard something. And just try and raise awareness as to where Mary had gone. They even did this test with Anne. So they hid in the bushes and they set Anne off on the route that possibly Mary would have taken. I guess it was like a twin thing. You know, when they finish each other's sentences off and feel like they're sharing each other's thoughts kind of thing. They wondered whether Anne would take the same route that Mary did, and if she had wandered off at any point, something had distracted her and she'd gone off the track home, then maybe Anne would choose that same route kind of thing. But Anne made it home, no problems. Eventually, Mary's parents had to send, her other children home. They couldn't stay there forever and they sent them home, but they did stay on longer. 6 weeks later though, they decided that they needed to go home too. They'd done everything they could to try and look for their little girl. They couldn't really contribute any more to it in that sense, and they had a family at home that they needed to get back to. They needed to get back on track with their lives, as difficult and as devastating as it is. They had to carry on, and so they did eventually go home and just hoped that the investigation would prove fruitful and they would find some information on her. It came out later that PJ did tell the police that around the time of Mary's disappearance, he had seen this red car speeding off. And that was just before he was made aware that a little girl had gone missing. This information didn't come to light until 2016. I don't know why it took that long, but it did, and it made people wonder as to whether that was the kidnapper's car. Now, the Boyle family over the years haven't had a great time. Obviously, they lost one of their children and their sister, and that is beyond devastating. Anne ended up growing up without a twin sister. She rebelled in her teenage years and got pregnant at the age of 17. Now, being in Catholic Ireland, that was frowned upon and she got a lot of stick for that. She did end up having a daughter who she called Mary. Charlie actually died as a result of a fishing accident in 2005, and Anne, mother and daughter, no longer speak. They had actually fallen out over Mary's case because they had a differing opinion as to what had happened to her. Anne truly believes that her sister was murdered by someone they knew, and that certain someone had actually been abusing Mary before she was killed, that maybe Mary had told them that she was gonna tell someone and that is why they killed her. The person that she believes this is has not been named, due to legal reasons and things, but was in fact one of the lead suspects at the time of the case occurring. Nothing more has come of that. This isn't what Anne, the mother, believes though. She believes that Mary was abducted by a stranger and that maybe she has actually been raised by said stranger. Due to the differing opinions on it, it's caused a lot of friction, and again, they don't speak anymore, which is really sad. Over the years, obviously, people have had theories in the cases. Her mum believes that, her sister believes the other thing, but I'd just like to say that these are just theories. We literally don't know what happened to her. So yeah, some people have speculated that maybe Mary did in fact wander off and get lost. Maybe she fell into the lake that day and they simply didn't find her because her body was sucked into the soft sand below. Maybe she fell in a bog and, I don't know, was drowned and was just never found. Maybe she is in those woods somewhere and maybe her remains will be found many years later. I mean, it's 44 years ago now, or maybe they just will never be found. The thing with the bog though, Mary's sister Anne has said she was known to be eating a packet of crisps at the time that she had gone missing. And so if she had fallen into a bog and sank, that the packet of crisps would have rise to the surface. So that is why she believes that that is not the case. What happened to Mary though on her way back to her grandparents' house in those 5 minutes remains a mystery to this day. And honestly, I have no idea what happened to her. I personally would be more along the lines that maybe she was abducted, but it's highly plausible that she could have just unfortunately gotten lost and, they just haven't managed to find her body. After all these years though, Mary Boyle's case remains unsolved. What do you guys think on this one? Do you think she got lost in the woods and unfortunately lost her life? Or do you think that somebody took her and either they killed her or, they did raise her as their own, because there's a lot of cases of that where people have taken children and just raised them as their own. Sometimes people find it out and sometimes they don't. But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for similar content. And if you want to join the pack, to all my regulars, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Mary Boyle. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.